the other thing that you talked about is important to understand that when we elect officials from our communities, they do, whether they want to or not, become representative of us. So I think that's something that people are conscious of and kind of makes people a little bit more critical, is the fact that I don't want this guy out there speaking on our community's behalf. He doesn't represent me, right? And I think that's where people are looking for a higher caliber, more representative individual for politics. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, people like you and other people. I was very impressed in the last election, 2019, how many women from our community stepped forward and ran, and I think that needs to continue. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we have to be careful on how much lest we forget, you know, in terms of what these guys did and the doors that they opened for us. Bill 21. Let's talk about Bill 21. And you know, this ties it all too, right? Because this is also, you know, our friend Jagmeet Singh, I feel, has let us down on this thing, and I was highly critical of him in my commentary last year on Bill 21. But let's unpack that.
Yeah, and you know, maybe for the benefit of your listeners, just to kind of give people background on Bill 21. So Bill 21 is a bill that the Quebec National Assembly passed. It, you know, their perspective on this is that this is the secularism bill. I think for people of you know, sort of religious minority communities, this is the anti-religious symbols bill. Effectively, it prohibits any religious symbols, outward religious symbols, from being worn while in the employee of government. That would apply to teachers, police officers, you know, judges, crown prosecutors, every other government department. And disproportionately, this affects members of the Muslim community, members of the Sikh community, you know, also affects people of the Jewish faith. But, you know, you're now having individuals who've grown up in Quebec, Quebecers, to have their identity tied in with being Quebec, not being able to practice their faith. You know, and for us, you know, I'm the vice president Alberta for the WSO, which is the World Sikh Organization of Canada, an organization that's been around for 30 plus years, fighting and advocating on behalf of the interests of Canadian Sikhs as well as other minorities. But, you know, our VP Quebec, prior to this issue, is a Sikh woman who ties the star, which is a turban, and she was going through her education, her post-secondary education, which was, you know, she wanted to be a teacher. So she, you know, she had moved to Quebec at a young age. She'd grown up there. She sees herself as a Quebecer, and she wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to be able to give back and nurture young minds. And yet, as she was moving towards graduation, there was this pending bill that would prevent her from practicing her faith and also allowing her to choose the career she wanted to. And sure enough, that bill passes, and now she becomes a refugee within this country. And she has to leave and move from Quebec to BC to be able to continue to practice her faith. And she was forced to make that choice. And the fact that Canadians don't understand the significance of this. So this is not, you know, you see a lot of conversation today about a national crisis, that Canada is broken, that the majority of Canadians believe the country is broken because of, you know, the inability of Canadian governments to reconcile Indigenous issues with economic growth and climate change issues. Well, within this story, you've completely discounted and you've completely ignored the challenges that minorities are facing, right? Even going to the greater conversation, the issue that the Indigenous communities are facing.
Absolutely.
So Bill 21, I think for all Canadians who believe in the Charter, and again, you've seen people talk about the rule of law. How many times in the past several weeks have we heard arguments from, you know, Canadians about, you know, the respecting of the rule of law? It's become almost at this, you know, frenzied output or volume that the rule of law must be applied. Well, what about the Charter and as it applies to people to be able to practice their faith in Quebec, right? When you go and ask Canadian politicians on a federal level, or even people who want to become prime minister, you know, they're talking about, well, Trudeau has not shown leadership. Where is Trudeau's leadership? He's a weak leader. He can't make hard decisions. on Bill 21, I don't see any political leader taking a hard position. I don't see any person coming out and speaking, out against this to say this is a direct violation of what this country stands for. Set aside the notwithstanding clause. Forget about that. While that is concluded within the Constitution, look at the basic elements of what we believe. And that's reflected in our charter. And we have Canadian politicians who are backing off this issue. So I want to come back to where you talk about Jagmeet Singh. You touched on...
Jagmeet Singh is the leader of the federal NDP.
Right, and he's also a baptized Sikh, so he wears a dasta, he wears a turban. The promise that came with Jagmeet Singh for our communities was somebody who was going to elevate the discourse.
Absolutely.
He was going to be the change agent who would now be able to shift our politics to a higher level, and I think that promise was felt by minorities across this country.
Absolutely, and not just for the Sikh community either, right, Karma? That for, like I said, of us, right? When I look at Jagmeet Singh, and I think a lot of Muslims and any person of color would look at someone like him and feel like here's somebody who visually looks different than what we're used to in politics, and then if you feel like you also are part of that group that visually looks different, and we all aspire. We were all inspired by him.
And so there's several problems and several problematic aspects of what happens with Jagmeet Singh once he becomes leader that I think play into this and play really well into the conversation around Bill 21. So, primarily, he becomes the leader of the NDP with a significant amount of members from Quebec. Immediately, people within his Quebec caucus are now worried that they will not get re-elected because Quebecers will not accept somebody who wears a dasta or wears a turban. And there was a headline from the CBC which said, are Canadians ready to accept a leader with a turban? So out the window goes conversations about merit.
Yeah, merit, education, qualifications,
policy,
representation.
And it becomes a conversation of, will they accept him? Sorry, the way that's framed within the media is completely wrong. It's, are Canadians racist?
Yeah.
Are they going to look past somebody based on merit to look at their visual identity to then reject them? That becomes a question that his own caucus starts to pose to him. Yeah. That we're worried that because of your outward identity that we won't get elected. No, it's because we're afraid that people are racist. Yeah. And we've now internalized that. So we're not going to stand up against that racism. We're not going to defend your ability to practice your faith. We need you to demystify your identity. Yeah. So you see videos of Jagmeet Singh taking the turban off and showing them it's just hair, right? This is not offensive. This is not threatening to you. Why does he need to do that? Yeah. The first interview that Jagmeet Singh does with Terry Milewski on the CBC, Terry Milewski has a very, very long track record, on issues with the Sikh community in a way that I think a lot of people would view as being negative. He's had problematic views when it comes to being extremely reductive in the way that he covers the Sikh community, but he becomes known as an expert for a lot of people because he's the only one covering those issues. Mm. Not for an actual deeper understanding of the dynamics that exist within the Sikh community, but solely because he's one of the only people that's ever covered us.
That's why this show is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to communicate to people that, number one, what you read about minority communities in this country is framed from the perspective of newsrooms that are not diverse, right? By media that is not diverse, but that has been legitimized in the eyes of people. So breaking that down, one of the first things that Terry Milewski asks Jagmeet Singh is to justify, one particular gurdwara, which are the Sikh institutions of faith, why they have a poster of a particular individual who was named in the area of bombing. Why, does he support this or denounce this? It's completely irrelevant to Jagmeet Singh. Yeah. Jagmeet Singh is a federal political leader. He has no connection to this particular gurdwara. The issue itself is nuanced for the people of Sikh faith. And so every time that the Sikh community has gone on media to try to talk about this, nobody wants us to actually explain what the nuance is. Yeah. There's interviews that our executive directors and our legal counsel have done with mainstream media. When you try to give the background of the Air India issue when it comes to the particular person, which is Balwinder Singh Parmar,
no one wants to hear it.
They don't want to hear it. They don't want to.
They've already made up their mind.
And the issue with, and I'd like to talk about the issue with Tulwinder Singh Parmar. Parmar is named during the Air India inquiry as being one of the main conspirators or perpetrators of this issue. And what ultimately happens with Parmar is Parmar's never tried in a Canadian court. Parmar is extradited to India, where he's killed in custody, in police custody. So there's this extrajudicial killing that happens of Tulwinder Singh Parmar in India. Under normal circumstances, Canadians would be outraged by this. Whether this person was an active player within the Air India bombing or not, the fact that he now is killed without due process, without a trial, but out of this killing comes a confession. There's a certain element and there's a certain part of our community that says that no, this man was not part of Air India bombing, that he was set up by the state. When I'm talking about the state, I'm talking about the state, the government of India, and that he's actually a martyr. They're not celebrating Parmar for saying that he was a perpetrator of a mass killing.
Yeah.
They're saying that this man was set up by a state, given the fact that he's now killed surreptitiously within India when he's there. That's a whole different conversation than, hey, why is your Gurdwara celebrating a mass murder? You can't answer that question without giving the history of to say, why do these people do this?
It's like the Umar Qadir conversation, right? For our community, right? That is such a complex thing as well. But again, it's always wielded as an example of terrorism in Canada, right? Umar Qadir, right? And he was given money by the government, and why are we housing and supporting this known terrorist who was 15 years old at the time when
well, and the evidence would show you that if you actually look at where he was in relation to what happened, he's a child. Yeah. He's literally buried beneath the rubble. Yeah. There's almost injured. There's almost no factual basis to suggest that. Again, and I don't want to get into the full history of this, but it's so disappointing that we don't see the nuance reflected in how we're reporting. So Jagmeet Singh starts his leadership with these questions that this scary-looking man is part of some scary terrorists who committed the greatest mass murder in Canadian history. It becomes this issue that now he has to wear. And now he has to try to reverse course on the impression that is created of him. And where does the narrative go from there? That he's incompetent, that he's not able to lead. And the biggest issue that people point to is the fundraising numbers. If you actually understand the story, the background to this issue, which is when Thomas Mulcair is on the way out, he goes scorched earth for the past year before the new leader shows up. Yeah. This could have been any single leader that shows up, and they're taking over what is basically now a dead carcass. You're not you've been involved in politics, not renewing credit cards, not communicating with your donors, not engaging with your donors. What happens as soon as you have that gap of time? Now to try to get them back on that monthly donor cycle is impossible. You've now left a broken system for him to inherit. And Jagmeet comes in as this person who's going to create change. He's basically casting aspersions on the previous regime to say they're incompetent. But when he comes in, he actually needs some of them. And this becomes this dire conflict for him, which is you've got a group of people that now look at you, having questioned their competency and their abilities, but now you need their help. And so there's a clash that happens. And you see Mulcair lash out at Jagmeet Singh throughout the next year and a half leading up to the last election. So much so where he's now essentially endorsing the Liberals. So Jagmeet's trying to reconcile all of this, and he's trying to rebuild a party. None of this is going to excuse what happens on Bill 21. But the other aspect that is there is that he doesn't want to become the only person speaking out on Sikh issues. Because if you look at his history,
of course, yeah.
He was, here's a person, Jagmeet Singh, who was banned from traveling to India for speaking out about their human rights abuses. He's somebody who has championed the causes of minorities and vulnerable communities throughout his career, which is why when he comes onto the federal stage, people have that promise, like you said. So he had those bona fides. But now, when he becomes federal leader, he's facing these struggles and these challenges. People in Nova Scotia, one of his board members for the party resigns because he says, you're not electable in Nova Scotia because of how you look. So now you're losing pieces all over the place because of how you look in your identity. Then you have an MP who says, I cannot support people who wear external religious symbols. I can't support that person, with my own because of my own beliefs and supports, because I believe in secularism and all that. While he's saying that in a press conference, and he's joining the Green Party, he's standing beside a leader, Elizabeth May, who's wearing a cross.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the 6 articles of faith are an issue for you, but the cross is not an issue for you. The lack of consistency in how this approaches. You can see how Jagmeet now is facing this internal crisis of, I'm still going to continue to practice my faith, but how do I reconcile that with building a party within a short period of time? I think the path that he takes is to try to be pragmatic and try to appease. And as the appeasement strategy within Quebec, they were going to lose that election in Quebec.
Yeah.
From a strategic, tactical perspective, they were going to lose in Quebec. Quebec has always been a mirage, and they've always been a mirage for the NDP. It took Jack Layton multiple elections to build what that was a wave. McClellan holds that coalition of people together, but these are not hard and dyed-in-the-wool NDPers. These are people that, based off of whatever regional issues are facing at the time, will go in any direction. So there's always a mirage. My advice, had I been able to give it to Jagmeet right when he became leader, was forget Quebec. Forget it. From a tactical perspective, you're never going to win there. Why waste your time appeasing these people?
I know, and that's exactly the problem that I had as well, Harman, right? It's just like, 70% of Quebecers were in favor of Bill 21. So, Jagmeet, bro, speak to the 30% that aren't, and then the rest of the country, right? Don't double down and, and cross your fingers and, toe the line on this situation, especially given, who you are and what you look like. I mean, this bill prevents you from actually working in Quebec in a lot of capacities, right? So I think that's the issue that people have, right? Authenticity, Harman, is so important, nowadays, especially in representation. It was bad enough that we all have imposter syndrome, when we step up in things like politics. I mean, I still deal with imposter syndrome every time, I get in front of a mic and feel like I shouldn't be speaking and making my voice heard, but then to do it and get that chance and get that national platform and not be genuine and not, speak on the behalf of the people that, are looking up to you. I think that's where he failed, and that's where people, had that criticism of him.
Yeah, and so it becomes, so here Jagmeet Singh is facing this, basic revolt from Quebec, and instead of, again, had he spoken out on Bill 21 in a very vocal way, because you saw the percolations of Bill 21 starting to become an election issue.
Yeah, dude, it's not new. Remember Harper, right? Harper's government, right? Anti-niqab, barbaric practice, all these types of divisive politics are not new. So, I mean, Jagmeet Singh doesn't have that out that, this is something new that he didn't understand.
Oh, absolutely. And you have to remember, there's another issue that in this country, as people of Sikh faith, there's only, 2 places basically where you couldn't wear your dastar or your religious symbols openly. One was the Quebec National Assembly.
Can you tell listeners what a dastar is?
So dastar is the turban, known in English as a turban, but it's an article of faith for the Sikh community, and it's inseparable. I think the way we describe it is that it's not something that you can take off and replace. It is so crucial and critical to your faith and the practice of your faith that it's inseparable from you and inseparable from your body if you're a Sikh. And so for
like the hijab is for Muslim women.
Absolutely.
Like Muslim women who choose to wear the hijab, it's the same thing. So, it's not as simple as like just take it off.
So it becomes very problematic for a lot of, I would say, right-wing politicians or people to reconcile this concept, because it's easy enough for them to look at the hijab and say, oh, this is oppression of women. What is this thought oppression of men? So they can't reconcile this, and so it's important for us to draw that equivalency, because now you can actually speak to the allyship between the Sikh community and the Muslim community, but it becomes very difficult for.
And we don't leverage that enough. We don't. The Sikhs are a relative small number in Canada. What's the total Sikh population?
I think it's about 500,000.
500,000. And versus Muslims, I think, are over 1 million now.
That's right.
But together, we have a good representation. But I don't think we leverage that allyship enough. And I mean, I say this all the time, to people who are like confused of like what how come Harman's a Punjabi and you're not? You were actually born in Punjab. And I say because Harman and I may be of different faiths, but we have more in common because we're from similar regions in Pakistan and India. and I'm a Punjabi just as much as Harman is, but I think we forget that. I mean, even in my interactions with the Sikh community, right? I still feel like I'm an outsider, and I'm just like, dude, you and I have more common in our cultural practices than differences in our faith practices.
Yeah, and I think this is something I want to talk to you about, which is the concept of Punjabiyat, right? Which is prior to partition, prior to the British now separating us, the existence of the relationship between Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, is one of brotherhood, is one of community, and there's a culturally the similarities are so strong. And just because we were separated in 1947 does not reflect what our the way that we operate and the way we function. And I think that's an important conversation for us to have. But going back to the conversation around the Star, it's a great way for you to now push this conversation to say, these are articles of faith. This is, you can now link, and having that equivalency strengthens the argument. But for Sikhs in Canada, the Quebec National Assembly is the one place that was left for us to fight, to be able to practice our faith openly. And what happened was our legal counsel was invited to go to the Quebec National Assembly to present on some issues related to the Sikh community. It was denied entry into the Quebec National Assembly for wearing his kirpan, wearing his dastar. And that case
kirpan is the ceremonial knife that some Sikh men wear as well.
That's right. And so that issue is still ongoing. That's the court challenges dealing with that issue are still ongoing issues. So the Sikh community has been fighting legal battles, and the World Sikh Organization, of which I had mentioned that I was the Vice President of Alberta, has been fighting these battles for the past 30, 40 years. And so during the federal election, now municipalities, municipal political leaders in this country started to step up and condemn Bill 21. They started taking the position.
Yeah, I've seen that now.
So you had, the city of Toronto, the city of Brampton, the city of Winnipeg, the city of Edmonton, Victoria, start to pass motions condemning Bill 21.
Calgary yet or no?
Calgary did. So Calgary was the one during the federal election where Nenshi had put this out there. So George Chahal, who's a councillor down there, George Chahal and Mayor Nenshi took a very strong leadership position on this.
I remember that.
And it becomes this federal issue because Calgary is now stepping up and saying we're condemning this. And as municipalities,
in the heart of Alberta blue.
Yeah. Well, and, having a previous, prime minister, Stephen Harper from Calgary. So they take this, this stand as municipal leaders, and credit to a lot of the municipal leaders across this country. In Edmonton, we were also fortunate to have some champions on council, and it passed unanimously. So condemning of Bill 21 was something that I think the city of Edmonton took seriously. And when I met with city councillors, every single one of them, I met with Councillor McKean, met with Councillor Banga, Councillor Hamilton. These three councillors really took this issue upon themselves to take a stand to say, this does not reconcile with what I believe Canada should be and the freedoms that exist in this country. And so,
and I think I've talked about this often too. Again, talking about that authenticity, right? Is that I think now people are more and more pushing all of our elected officials to weigh in on those issues that are outside of their purview, right? So it's not acceptable to me anymore that my counselor doesn't have an opinion on something like Bill 21, that my counselor doesn't have an opinion on what's happening with black rights in the US or what's happening in India. I want every elected official at every level of government to have an opinion on these things because it tells me everything I need to know about them in terms of their worldview, their grasping of global politics and other complex issues. So I think those days are gone where they just say like, oh, I'm just a municipal politician, so this doesn't matter to me, right?
Well, and you've seen that, Seattle City Council actually passes a motion denouncing a law that was passed in India that was intended to target Muslims, and even with what happens, if we talk about modern, this past week, we've seen Delhi, which is the capital of India, descend into chaos where you have, right-wing Hindu nationalists, Hindutva, RSS supporters go and start to attack and target Muslims with violence, with, they've been setting masjids on fire. It's been many days where the police have been complicit. For a lot of Sikhs, this brings back memories of what happened to the Sikh people in 1984. And one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about the Sikh community in Canada is, why are we all here? Well, part of the waves of immigration, forget, back in 1800s and the early 1900s, in the modern era, 1984 was a day, was a period of time where Sikhs in India were targeted, and genocide was committed on us.